Right.
Good morning, friends. The topic today is something which is very local, which concerns all of us. And it is the title of An Elected Mayor for Bristol. This is different in some ways as it is a discussion. And as usual in the time, we need someone who could manage this discussion. And we all couldn't think of anybody better than our friend Jenny Smith.
Right. I was a councillor on Bristol City Council for 23 years. So I have actually served under both systems. And when you're a councillor, I think the one thing you want is to have things on your agenda that you know are coming up and going to arrive. And under Avon County Council, we always knew what the next issue was and what was coming up. When we changed and went under a mayor system on Bristol City Council, it was like having rabbits come out of a bag, and you had very little time to actually think about it as a councillor. And certainly I worried about what was happening with the local people. I have a friend who's a solid Tory party member, and she said, oh yes, but you stopped people coming and going on and on and on about rubbish. Well, rubbish is what different people consider is rubbish. And some of it I always found when I was a cabinet member, and I found that some of what the public said helped you. Now, when you're discussing this, I want you to think about the various services that Bristol City cover, because I think it's essential that people don't just look to the pyramid top. You start to think about how a council should come together so that items are brought before the public onto a committee, and then the public can turn up and complain. And then at the end of the day, you feel that somebody might have listened to you, or someone else that said what you wanted to say. And certainly I hope it will open up the discussion in our local papers. A lot more debate about where we're going, why we're going, and if we've achieved it. Because if we don't, then we should be, if you're a councillor, hung out to dry. Now, I've been writing down services that the local authority cover. Social services and social care is a major one, and it actually ties up with the health system in the city. I think all we've heard about is complaints about the health in the city not working. And I think that a committee, if it gets back on its feet, should actually encompass both sides, help the National Health Service, but at the same time aim to make sure that the services are well staffed, well funded, and meet the reaches of all the problems that our community is having today. And so I would see one committee covering that. What happens at the moment is that social services representative councillors meet with the health committee, but then they started to ban the public going in. I don't know whether you all realise that. Yeah. I tried to go back to listen to what was going on, and I wasn't allowed in the room. I think that's worrying. And I think it's essential we bring that back so that there is seating at the back for people to listen, like me, to listen. And if we want to make a statement about a service that we are worried about, lobbying, then we should still be allowed to do that. I don't know how much lobbying's gone on under the mayor's system. Oh, and the other thing is to make it absolutely essential, and this I outed to the press when I was a cabinet member, that the paperwork actually does arrive a few days before the meeting, so you can read it. Because the Liberal Democrats, when they were running it under George, actually was trying to produce it at the very last minute on the day it was to be considered. You can't read paperwork that's about essential services at the very last minute. To make absolutely sure, what we should be demanding is the paperwork comes out into the public arena ahead of what's happening. George was very, very good at rushing things onto the agenda at the very last minute, and it used to annoy me like mad. But then I used to annoy him by outing it. Leisure and libraries and things like youth clubs and all the rest of it used to go under one major umbrella. Now, usually it was a working party doing it away from, but bringing items onto the main agenda of the full council. And I have attended a few council meetings recently and haven't seen any of those items appear. You can tell me I'm wrong, tell me that they have happened, but I want the public to ensure that they do happen in somewhere where they can actually talk. Housing, Bristol City now have major problems because they're building housing with housing associations and private developers. And the private developers, all my experience in the past was that they gazump on the decisions.
Okay.
I had a big tussle in Southmead about what South Gloucester was doing over the border. And they were planning all sorts of environmental things and, oh, wasn't it wonderful? And we're so good. Then the planning was passed and slowly they took away a lot of the promises that were there. It's absolutely essential that the public have access to those discussions and ensure that that's covered. Planning and highways, we have the ring road sitting around the city. And although I'm told, I hope it's right, that it has been cancelled, it could well not be. We don't know. But then there are potholes all over the city, and there are all sorts of things related to highways, such as taxis and public transport and all sorts of other things, which is essential that we get out into the public arena. We did recently have a consultation about the number 2 that went through. I spotted a poster down in Victoria Street and outed it on Stockwood's main line because they'd failed to put any posters around Stockwood. And within 24 hours, we were covered in posters on every lamppost you could think of. It's quite funny. I haven't really stopped. I think I have in a way, but I haven't. Green issues are essential, and I'm sure the Green Party have got lots up their sleeve. And we've got to really seriously think about whether they work, how we pay for them, and whether they will work out the way that they're intended. So right on paper, it's when it actually happens. So I'm going to ask all those with green credentials to think about being very, very nosy at every step of our green issues that go through. Don't waste money and make sure we have a green city. And central government. The reason we had an elected mayor system is it's easier for central government to actually talk directly to the mayor and get things decided behind the scenes. And that was constantly happening. It was like rabbits coming out of a hat when you were a councillor and you thought, well, what committee did that come from? Where has it come from? And why are we agreeing it? So if you have a number of people on the full council meeting that come from those committees, then you could put your foot down at times as a member, an elected member. But we also want to ensure that there's transparency, that we've just had a contract go through that's been given, haven't we, David, to a firm about green issues. And that was like a rabbit out of the hat. Suddenly, we found that they agreed to this contract, which will provide allegedly green items for the city council. But have you, any of you, heard about it? So I think now I hand over to you to discuss this, because as a councillor in the past, I saw the change that took place when we got a mayor system. And I know central government love to have a mayor system because they've only got one human being to hassle.
I don't know if anybody else has seen the results of the mayoral things.
Referendum.
Pardon?
Referendum. We had a
referendum. Well, if you haven't, this is a spoiler, so you can turn off a lot if you like, but Bristol has decided that they don't like mayoral things. And from 2024, we're not going to have a mayor, folks.
Sorry, I had assumed you all knew.
No.
On 36% of the vote, and that's sad.
Yeah.
Christopher.
Two things that I'd like to say, I mean, which Jenny may be able to talk to. One is that, I mean, this may be a departmental issue rather than the council issue, but I've always felt with any survey that the council's done that I've responded to, that in fact they've already decided before they ask you what the answer is going to be. And the other thing is, I seem to remember in the past that people felt the Labour Party stitched up everything at full council because they would discuss it at a Labour Party meeting in private, you know, before the council was meeting, and will have agreed how they're all going to vote and everything. So when there was a Labour majority, which I'm not I don't think there is now, is there? No. Of course, you know, they could do whatever they wanted. Anyway, that's me.
They all have meetings. The Liberal Democrats, the Tories and Labour always have pre-meetings before they go into a council meeting.
And do they then decide what's going to happen in the council meeting?
Well, whoever's responsible for the service that's being discussed has to bring the issues before the Labour group or the Tory group or the Lib Dem groups and now the Green group, and to put those issues before them before they actually walk into a full council. So all parties have obviously got ideas about where they might vote. They have, occasionally there's a change and they don't vote what they intended to vote, but they do what questions they want to ask. So it is really a lot of what happens at the full council has been decided ahead of time by all the groups. Not always, but most of the time. So they're all guilty.
It's interesting that we have a result, and it's about 60%, isn't it? It was a decent majority for abolishing the mayor system. I guess that in some ways, I mean, Marvin was campaigning to retain the mayoral system, and I went to a meeting that he spoke at that was very lightly attended, shall we say, and it sort of reflects on our last couple of mayors that Bristol was when we had the opportunity to have a mayor, there was a referendum, and about a dozen councils had the opportunity. And I think, if I remember rightly, Jenny, Bristol was the only one that decided to have an elected mayor. And now we've decided, after a couple of 3 spins, that maybe not to. So I find that very interesting.
Mm. What is it? The proof of the pudding's in the eating.
Mm. And the criticism that I had heard of the mayoral system is that in some ways councillors had weaker roles in this, and so it was becoming more difficult to recruit people to become councillors, because councillors felt, you know, they weren't as involved in things. And I have this thought: if you are at the centre of a network, then you have a really good feeling about how it's working, because you're connected to everything. And I think that's why Marvin found it very easy to argue for there being a mayor, because when people would say this, that, and the other, he'd got examples of everything, of things that were happening. Bristol's doing this, Bristol's doing that, which is, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But he's at the kind of the spider at the center of the web, and other people feel less included. So, I mean, the recent series of talks that we had about party politics, I sort of rounded off with my thoughts from brief experience with the Natural Law Party. And the biggest thing that was proposing to me was the idea of much more interaction, bringing together the public with the councillors and the officers and the people delivering services, so that you'd have meetings that would be like with people from the healthcare system or with educators. And so I had a little fantasy in my mind of going up to the poll and doing a write-in, you know, not elected mayor or back to the committee system, but I want participative democracy. And I think that, you know, in a way, this is a step backwards. It certainly means that there's an implicit critique of the way that we moved forwards. And I'd say the game's not over. I think there is dissatisfaction with the way that the council does do things participatively, and that we should be thinking about it. And Sir John Egan's Skills for Sustainable Communities, and in 2004, when he was asked by John Prescott to look at how we create sustainable communities, he basically said the planning system is broken and that we need much more participation in the way that we make decisions. And you could spread that across from housing and sustainable communities to health, I think, and other areas. So, and one thing to drop in the pot is the idea of more citizens' assemblies. If you've got a few things that are really important for the city to consider, can't we set those up as some kinds of public or citizens' assemblies, so that there really is more participation, and not just not just consultations, but recommendations based on informed groups of citizens.
Can I come in here, David?
I'm done. That was my little rant. Thank you.
Right. No, wonderful. However, I've got a daughter that works for the city council. Don't tell everybody, please. They have been laying off workers. They are making their workers work overtime without paying them, and telling them that they will get holiday in lieu eventually. And many of them are elderly. They are in buildings that the structures are really old-fashioned in some cases. And so many have actually now been lost their jobs. So you're getting less and less people working inside the council, doing multiple jobs that they didn't do before. Now, that has not been in the Evening Post, as far as I know. Not gone anywhere. And if I didn't have a daughter that's in there, I wouldn't know what's happening. I'm worried about her health. She's had COVID. She needs to walk. She's actually going in to work in the city council 2 days a week on the top floor all by herself. So don't tell anybody I've told you this, but I think we ought to also check what's happening to the staff. Because the government took away, was it £9 million, didn't they? Took it back from the council. People don't realise that the budgets have had to be cut, not because they want to, but because the money is just not there, even though the council tax gone up. And the reason the city council, well, why am I trying to protect them? I shouldn't do, but the reason the city council is building more and more housing in the city is that will bring in more council tax to try to help the rebudgeting.
Could I ask a question on housing, because it's something that occurred to me recently, and a while ago. I think the university was built, talking about their new campus in by Temple Meads or wherever it's going to be, but they hadn't built any student accommodation, and they were assuming that the market would cope with that. And it occurred to me since, I mean, the number of students in Bristol at the two universities has increased a great deal over recent years. And surely this must be one of the reasons that we've got so much pressure on our housing stock, that although, you know, there is some purpose-built stuff, a lot of the houses around here are let out to students, and you know, I must admit, and I do wonder nowadays what the universities, you know, provide to Bristol, because you know, they don't seem to get involved in things that they used to.
No.
Yeah.
I've also got another daughter that runs a painting and decorating business for landlords in Clifton area. And that's quite interesting, because she said, I've turned into the mum for students, and I'm helping them clear out the rubbish out of their rooms and things. She said, I'm now second mum, whether I like it or not. And she just gets a different wave of students come in, because she has to repair the properties after they've during the August, so that it's back in a good condition to rent out again in September. And lots of those youngsters have never been away from home and never been away from parents that cared for them, which is a bit of a shock for some of them.
Used to know one of the major landlords who owned quite a number of student properties, and because I rented a property from him, and he said, there's no use trying to contact me from July to September, because I won't be available to do anything. I would be involved in the student let population, you know, and I found out later he had, and get this folks, he had over 200 houses which he let out to students. On the student thing also, as Christopher mentioned, if you go into town these days, the only thing being developed is student accommodation. I can't see any other at the moment. And if you're part of central meeting, if you just go up the road, what used to be an old council property is now part of UE's student accommodation, which is being developed. They used to have a hub for council where you could go in and ask the council what happening in the council type of thing, but that has gone now. The only one now is in the middle of town at, I think it's called One Plaza or something like that, something rather American. But I think Bristol City is not a very good place if you're trying to find a reasonable or affordable accommodation. Good luck with that, my friend, because it's not happening, and it should.
The ex-housing association house, which is opposite us, which has, we think it's got a jinx. All the neighbours call it the house with the jinx because tenants come and go very quickly. It was being advertised. A woman with 2 babies has just moved in. £1,300 a month. And somebody else said, oh, that's quite cheap to me. So how are we going to change the world and change the city council? Come on. And I'm not going back as a councillor. I'm a free spirit and I can complain.
Perhaps one thing you could do though, Jenny, is recruit, encourage, vigorously encourage suitable people to put themselves up as councillors. You could advise people who've never done such a thing before about the best way to go about it, and they could always come to you for advice. And that way you could still be a free spirit, but we might actually end up with some better informed, better performing councillors. Just a thought.
When, there were a couple of buildings in Stokes Croft that were derelict for a long time, Westmoreland House and the Carriage Works, and caused quite some dissatisfaction in the community, because I mean it leaves a bit of a vacuum when you've got buildings that are being allowed to rot. Apparently they were owned by a couple of businessmen who were sort of holding the council to ransom, as it were, putting in slightly unreasonable planning applications. And it's, well, if you want to see something done, you've got to grant our planning application, otherwise we'll just continue to leave the buildings empty. And eventually somebody, I'm not sure which person on the council, decided something had to be done, and there was talk of a compulsory purchase, and some money was sourced from somewhere for a group to create a community vision, right? And so there was a whole interactive process about what the community would like to see on this development, and a working group was formed, and there was quite a lot of energy put into it and enthusiasm, and eventually discussions with a developer, and then eventually, oh, that developer has pulled out, they weren't really real, somebody else has come in, sort of doesn't matter what the community has wanted, this is what's going forward as a proposal. And then when the proposal was accepted by the council, exactly what Jenny said happened, which is that the planning was granted for a development that was far less than what the community wanted, basically all expensive housing, no even quote unquote affordable housing, meaning still too expensive, but less expensive than unbelievably expensive. No affordable housing, no parking. And there's a lot of apartments. So what's this going to do? But then, having got through a plan that wasn't really satisfactory on the strength of, well, if it's not this, nothing's going to happen. You know, these guys are offering to save the area. Gradually, more applications went in to further dilute that application. So what's being built is what's being built is at least being built. The places, you know, the buildings were demolished, which was great to see. Something new is being put in its place, which is also good to see. But it's the idea that it was the result of a community participation got so diluted as to be almost meaningless. And the idea that it was meeting the council's aspirations for affordable housing, even that's out of the window. So to me, that reinforces the idea that whether you have a directly elected mayor or whether you have a council led by committees, we are not ending up with things that are really deeply discussed by the public with the council and its officers about what we want planning. And we end up with things that are just not satisfactory. And you end up with people, a generation of people who are disillusioned because there was talk of an interactive process. People get involved in it, people get enthusiastic, people put their energy into it, something is published, people get all excited, and then all that gets frittered away. And it's, people are thinking, well, I don't know why I bothered. I don't know why I bothered. So whether there's a councillor to talk to or only a mayor, there is the prevailing feeling is, well, I don't know why I bothered to get involved in that. You know, something happened that I didn't have much input into, and it's a fait accompli. So I guess I'll just get on with my life and ignore being involved in local politics. And I think people do take that decision just after a while. Well, I bashed my head on that one and I didn't get a result. So if that's true of this mayoral system, and it was true of the old committee system, then I think we haven't reached a satisfactory result, and we should be looking to what is going to create a real renaissance in our cities.
What we need is planning laws revised. They've been changed dramatically over the years, and all of the benefits have come out to big business. And so it's often the local authority can't do anything about it. Look at the Grosvenor Hotel by Temple Meads. That had an owner that charged people, said he was going to turn it into student flats. Lots of parents bought into that, and then he walked off and disappeared with all the money. Then we had the latest thing was he sold it, and it was belonging to someone who lived in India. And they're still trying to actually unravel who owns the old Grosvenor Hotel opposite Temple Meads and the other hotel opposite Temple Meads. Now, it's an absolute eyesore. But how do you actually stop someone buying something that is about to commit major fraud, and then when you try and untangle it, has sold to somebody that is extremely hard to identify in another country very far away? It's smart, Alex. We had spivs during the war. Well, they've grown up, they've gone into property, I think, and we've got the results in our city. And if you think everything that comes out with a planning application, once it goes through committee, is agreed, you've got another thing coming. It isn't. They play with it in the background and argue behind the scenes with officers, and then say we won't build it anyway if you don't agree to our changes. We need a government that actually looks in depth at planning legislation. Yeah, I've learned an awful lot in my life.
There was a young lad who had a bit of money, and he went to his dad and said, "Dad, where should I put my money?" And the father looked at him and smiled and said, "Buy land. They're not making it anymore."
Mm. Come on then, if we want to change the world, how are we going to do it? And don't tell me a revolution, because it brings out the worst in people, as we can see in Russia.
Well, I don't see how the current party political system is going to deliver change, because it's underwritten. I mean, you know, we've seen that this government that we have at the moment was funded by oligarchs. You know, where even just the drippings from the table of a corrupt Russia was enough to dominate not just the London property market, but the funding of one of our political parties. So we know that capitalism, in whatever form it is, so, you know, concentration of wealth at the top, leads to a dilution of political process. So materialism has led to something that doesn't work. You know, this book I'm reading at the moment, The Politics of Being, is basically about the question of whether we can upset materialism as the foundation of all our systems, not just politics. And so, you know, there are examples of communities that are based on human and spiritual values, like Auroville in India. And I think the potential is probably not to reverse the evils in our cities, but to create examples of what is the right way of doing things. And it's only, I've talked myself up to that point. As I was saying that last sentence, I was thinking of a series of books that I've read by a Russian author, Vladimir Megre, in which he is arguing that in the first book, he's certainly not heading in that direction. He writes 9 books. He has a muse called Anastasia, and she's sort of educating him on how we should reform our communities to be to recreate the Garden of Eden, actually, which she describes as how our lives were lived in the Vedic period in Russia. She describes that there was a collaborative spiritual civilization across the entire Eurasian landmass, and that has only survived in our myths as the Garden of Eden. But it was a supercontinent-sized civilization. And what she's suggesting, or Megre ends up suggesting, is creating eco-villages around our cities where people are living more in tune with nature, that takes the pressure off our cities. And you give everybody a hectare of land for free. You have the right to have a hectare of land for free. That's more than we could do in this country because we don't have that much land per person. But an acre or a quarter of an acre is possible. So you divvy up the land around your cities, which can be done through, there's legislation that allows for what's called urban exception sites, or is it rural exception sites? But anyway, exception sites around the fringes of towns and cities. But instead of building dense housing, you build eco-villages with a certain amount of space between the houses, and then people can breathe. And her idea is that every councillor should be given, as it were, the keys to an eco-village, and can, you know, say, oh, you my friend, you my friend, you my friend, you can all live in my eco-village, and that there should be, what was it, homeless people, refugees, and ex-offenders in every eco-village, so that you create a nourishing, rehabilitative society. And then the idea is that councillors are not allowed to be in the city more than 2 or 3 days a week. So they're actually living in a more natural environment before they go into the city to make decisions. So that's one very radical proposal for how you can rehabilitate our cities by thinning them out, having more people live in the surrounding countryside, growing the food that the people in the cities need to live on. And there's quite a substantial movement being created in Russia of eco-villages in the less dense areas, like in Siberia. So that's a thought, that you start to create eco-villages. And in Wales, there's now a presumption for planning in rural areas if you're going to create a community that meets One Planet Living standards. So there's already some thought of this, that we open up green belt, not for barrack housing, but for highly environmentally sound housing. You know, I'm thinking you maybe to have a 500-acre farm, and you build a 50-house eco-village on it. And everybody gets an acre for their house, but those 50 families then farm the rest of that farm. So you've created community-supported agriculture. So you create a revolution in how we do our farming. That's just one thought. And that's in response to Jenny saying, you know, how are we going to do something revolutionary? And I think, you know, I despair when I think of tinkering with the existing system, because I think it's corrupt and funded with corrupt money. So we actually need to set up a new model of how we live around our cities, and gradually thin our cities out and make them more sustainable, more resilient, more human, more community-like, not just housing, but restoring real communities.
Mm-hmm.
I've the series of books, which are known as the Ringing Cedar books by this man Megre. I've read them through from, there's 9 books, and I've read them from cover to cover 4 times so far, and I'm planning to do it again because they're so inspirational, and it's such fresh thinking. And it involves a lot of thought about how to improve education, food growing, all sorts of things. It's a comprehensive plan for a new kind of civilization. And right now we've become aware that Russia is going to need serious rehabilitation. But I think the seeds of what Russia should become already exist in this rather wonderful eco-village movement.
Could I say though, David, what we've got to do is reach out to the next generations, because we are the past.
Yeah,
and the next generation, this ought to be discussed with them, debated. It's not in our media. Our news items are all about egos for politicians and people, and nothing to do with everyday survival for most of the time. And we've got to move on to thinking about some of us sharing some of our thoughts back down the line. I talk to my children a lot about things. They know that they've got a mother that grows things in the back garden. And I know that a daughter's been put in a flat that's now growing plants all the way along the ledges on the flats and everywhere. Shouldn't be there. what we should do is give a bit of land with every house that comes, so that you could grow a bit of your own food or your flowers or something and go back to Mother Nature. And Mother Nature we need.
Well, this movement, eco-village movement, is very much amongst young people in Russia. And it's on the strength of, well, I couldn't afford to live in a city. This is the only thing I could afford, right? So basically, you know, you end up with a hectare of land and you build a cabin on it and you plant some trees, and they all seem to love planting trees and figuring out their growing plan and everything. And then it becomes what they call a place of love. You know, it becomes a wonderful place to bring up children. So it's very much a young people's movement in Russia, and I have friends who've read these books in this country and who want to do the same thing here, and who have not figured it out yet. But you know, that to me is the wave of the future. So Jen is right. We should be having this discussion amongst ourselves and with our young people. I think at the moment, young people are looking at, you know, they're coming out of university with tens of thousands of debt. So let alone the idea of buying a house. You know, I can't even think of buying a house. I'm going to be 40 before I've paid off my student debt or whatever.
And with the interest rates going up at the moment by 10%, that's going to put all their mortgages up and make life worse for people that have worked out originally that they could survive and do it, and now find that they're not going to be able to.
Well, that's part of the financial rip-off mechanism of the way the country runs. First of all, you make credit available cheap. People borrow as much as they can, and then you raise interest rates, and whatever it is that people are paying suddenly becomes impossible. So you pull in the loans, and what people were buying becomes owned by the banks. It worked for the Great Depression. It's the mechanism. You raise and lower, you create booms and busts, you raise and lower interest rates, and you gradually rip the people off. It's deeply, deeply wrong, but it's the way that the financial markets work, and we are flayed alive by these cycles.
Well, that's a nice analogy for us to carry on from. So, does anybody else anybody else wishes to speak on the subject?
Can we all go away with the question in our mind, what are we going to do to help the young understand and to be able to hold on to what little they might own? A miracle.
Right. So, you know, the miracle would be to create something that's actually fair.
Yeah.
And we're so far, you know, you didn't even say that, Jenny. That seems
fair.
But people, you know, ordinary people. I visited with a friend yesterday who, as a result of having been married to a very successful businessman and split up, she's living in a beautiful house in the country, beautiful, beautiful house in the country. But she was talking about how unfair life is for ordinary people. And she, you know, it's just a natural sense that people have of what's fair and what isn't fair. Kids know what's fair and what isn't fair. And what we've got at the moment just isn't fair. But if you've got, you know, half the world's wealth is in the hands of 30, 40, 50 individuals, that implies that everybody could have twice as much.
I was once working with a youth group, and we all got there in the morning, we all had our coffee and sat down, and so I said, right, what do we want out of life? What do you want out of life? And a young lad, he can't have been more than 16, 17, said, I want a big house, a big car and a big telly. And I said, is that it? And he said, yeah, what else is there? And a young girl looked at him and she said, it's all right to have a big house, a big telly and a big car, but a big telly can't give you an hug. And that's it. We need each other. All these periphery is all very nice, and I have them. I'm speaking to you on a periphery, you know, which if I wanted to, I could do without. And a big telly over there, lots of books behind me and things like that. But yeah, these are all things which make us happy. But we need each other. We need each other around us. And we need to be, I hesitate to say, a little bolder in what we do within the community, because we, friends, are the intelligent ones. I haven't come across many Quakers which didn't have a degree, or may I say, you know, educationally doctorates and things, you know. So naughty of me to say that, I know, but we are the intelligent, Quakers are intelligent people. Quakers are in the upper echelons of intelligent people. So we also are be the ones who should be out there going, keeping people to their word. And I, as one of many, am a failure on that a lot of the time. But as that phrase goes, I will try to do better. And it does come down to a me, doesn't it? Because when someone says they should be doing something about it, I always find that they is you and me, friend.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness me, I've reduced people to silence. Maybe that is it. It is 12:05 now, friends. And before we go off and have lunch and do things like that, does anybody have anything else to say?
Thanks, Jenny, for centering our discussion.
I wasn't quite sure what to do, really, but I hope that's fitted.
Yes, thank you very much. Next week, Jackie Barron is going to be talking about changes in policy towards women suffering from domestic violence, and so I hope a few of us can get together for that anyway.
Oh, different.
Yeah.
Thank you, friends.
Right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, bye.